What if the most powerful people in the world are hiding a terrifying secret? Jeffrey Epstein's rise and mysterious death pulled back the curtain on a world of untouchable elites, blackmail, and corruption so deep it will make you question everything you thought you knew. The truth behind Epstein's empire is darker than you could ever imagine, and the questions it leaves unanswered may haunt you forever. Chapter 1: The Rise of a Phantom Billionaire. The story of Jeffrey Epstein is one shrouded in mystery from the very beginning. Born in 1953 in the working-class neighborhood of Coney Island, Brooklyn, Epstein's early years offered no clues to the life he would later lead. There were no whispers of wealth or privilege in his family. Instead, young Jeffrey appeared to be an ambitious student with a sharp mind and a keen ability to charm those around him. But beneath this surface lay the foundation of an enigma, a man who would rise to unimaginable wealth without the traditional markers of success. By the 1970s, Epstein's journey began in earnest when he secured a job teaching math and physics at the prestigious Dalton School in Manhattan. He was not a traditional hire. Epstein lacked a college degree, a detail that was glossed over by the school's headmaster at the time, Donald Barr, a name that would later raise eyebrows, given that Barr was the father of William Barr, the U.S. Attorney General during the final chapter of Epstein's life. It was here, at Dalton, that Epstein first crossed paths with the elite. The young teacher had a magnetic personality, charming both students and parents, some of whom were titans of industry. It wasn't long before Epstein caught the eye of Alan Ace Greenberg, the chairman of Bear Stearns, one of the most powerful investment banks on Wall Street. Despite having no formal financial training, Epstein was offered a position at Bear Stearns in 1976. His rise within the firm was meteoric. By 1980, Epstein had become a limited partner, a rare achievement for someone with such a brief tenure. His work focused on managing the fortunes of the ultra-wealthy, an area in which Epstein appeared to excel with uncanny ease. But for those who looked closer, his ascent raised more questions than it answered. Epstein's financial dealings were often described as opaque, his methods inscrutable. He left Bear Stearns in the early 1980s under unclear circumstances. Some rumors suggested insider trading. Others whispered of personal scandal. But rather than marking a setback, Epstein's departure became the catalyst for his transformation into a shadowy billionaire. Soon after leaving, he established his own firm, J. Epstein & Co., which claimed to specialize in managing the fortunes of clients worth over $1 billion. It was an audacious claim, one that few could verify. His business practices were veiled in secrecy. Potential clients were told they could not know the names of his other clients, and his firm operated more like a covert operation than a typical financial office. Despite this, Epstein's wealth grew exponentially. How did he do it? How did a man with no formal education in finance and no verifiable list of clients become a power broker with access to the world's richest and most powerful? One theory, which has gained traction over the years, is that Epstein was more than just a financier. Some speculate that he was involved in a far more sinister enterprise, one where blackmail, not just money, was the currency of power. Rumors abound that Epstein's real skill lay in his ability to entrap the wealthy and influential. There are whispers that Epstein's homes, most notably his Upper East Side mansion and his private island in the Virgin Islands, were wired with hidden cameras. Guests would be invited to lavish parties where they might engage in illegal activities, and Epstein, some say, recorded it all. The theory goes that these recordings were then used as leverage, a form of modern-day blackmail that kept his high-profile clients under his thumb. It's a theory that, while chilling, begins to make sense of Epstein's improbable rise. What if Epstein wasn't just a predator, but an operative? Some investigators and journalists have posited that Epstein's vast wealth and untouchable status may have been the result of connections to intelligence agencies. The theory suggests that Epstein's operations could have been sanctioned by powerful government forces, particularly intelligence agencies like the CIA or Mossad, who would have benefited from having leverage over politicians, business leaders, and cultural figures. This idea, while unproven, points to the peculiar immunity Epstein seemed to enjoy. Time and again, despite credible accusations, he evaded real consequences for his actions. And then there's the matter of his connections. Epstein's client list included some of the most recognizable names in the world: Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, and Leslie Wexner, the billionaire behind Victoria's Secret. Wexner, in particular, played an outsized role in Epstein's financial ascent. Wexner not only entrusted Epstein with his fortune, but also signed over his palatial New York mansion, the very mansion Epstein would later use as the backdrop for some of his most depraved crimes. Why would a man as savvy as Wexner hand over control of his assets to someone with no proven track record? Again, the specter of blackmail looms large. Then there's the question of Epstein's wealth itself. Estimates of his net worth have ranged wildly, but what's clear is that his empire was built on foundations that seem, at best, unstable. Financial documents related to his holdings are sparse, and the sources of his income are almost impossible to trace. His island, his properties, his fleet of jets, where did the money come from? Was Epstein really a brilliant financier? Or was his wealth a byproduct of something darker, something far more dangerous? In the end, Epstein's rise to billionaire status raises more questions than it answers. His life was one of contradictions, of secrets hidden in plain sight. Was he simply a man who manipulated the levers of wealth and power? Or was he a pawn, or perhaps a player, in a game much larger than himself? As we delve deeper into the tangled web of Epstein's life, one thing becomes clear. The story of Jeffrey Epstein is not just about one man, but about the dark intersections of money, power, and control that shape the highest levels of society. Chapter 2: The Network of Power. If Jeffrey Epstein was a phantom billionaire, then the web of influence he wove around himself was his most powerful tool, an invisible shield of untouchable elites that seemed to protect him from scrutiny at every turn. Epstein's connections were not just friendships or casual associations. They were strategic alliances, cultivated and nurtured over decades, and they stretched to the highest echelons of power. Presidents, princes, scientists, billionaires, Epstein had them all in his orbit. But what was the nature of these relationships? And how did a man like Epstein, with no real credentials, manage to entwine himself so deeply into the lives of the world's most powerful figures? One of the most glaring names in Epstein's little black book was former U.S. President Bill Clinton. Clinton's relationship with Epstein has been the subject of intense speculation, not least because of the number of times Clinton is documented to have flown on Epstein's private jet, the infamous Lolita Express. Clinton acknowledged flying on Epstein's plane for charitable purposes, particularly related to his philanthropic efforts in Africa. But flight logs show Clinton made numerous trips, some of which seem to have little to do with any official charitable work. And then there's the fact that Clinton visited Epstein's private island, Little St. James, at least once, a location later described by many as the epicenter of Epstein's darkest activities. While Clinton has denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes, the former president's close association with such a notorious figure raises serious questions. Was Epstein simply another donor, another wealthy benefactor in the orbit of a former president? Or was there more to this relationship? Theories abound that Epstein's true power came from his ability to gather compromising information, blackmail, on powerful people like Clinton, possibly even using his private jet or island as a trap for those unwise enough to let down their guard. Prince Andrew of the British royal family found himself similarly ensnared in Epstein's web. Photos surfaced of the prince in the company of Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's most outspoken accusers, with Epstein himself appearing in the background. Giuffre has publicly alleged that she was trafficked by Epstein and forced into encounters with Prince Andrew when she was just 17. Despite Prince Andrew's denials, his defense only raised more questions. His infamous BBC interview, in which he claimed he was at a pizza restaurant on the night of one alleged encounter, and that he couldn't sweat due to a peculiar medical condition, was widely ridiculed, further damaging his credibility. How had Epstein managed to cultivate such a close relationship with a member of the royal family? And more importantly, what did he gain from it? But Epstein's network extended far beyond the political sphere. He was known to host gatherings of intellectuals, scientists, and cultural influencers at his various estates, mixing the worlds of high academia with the murky world of finance and power. Figures like theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking and MIT's Marvin Minsky attended Epstein's lavish parties. Epstein even funded academic institutions, including donations to Harvard University, where he held a reputation as a patron of cutting-edge research. But many of these associations now seem tainted, their purpose called into question. Was Epstein a genuine patron of science? Or was he using these connections to gather more than just knowledge? One of the most curious aspects of Epstein's life was how he managed to move in these circles despite the mounting allegations against him. Rumors of his sexual misconduct swirled for years before his eventual arrest, yet powerful figures continued to associate with him, seemingly unbothered by the growing cloud of scandal. Why? The answer may lie in Epstein's skillful use of influence, leveraging his connections for protection in much the same way he leveraged his wealth. It's possible that many of the elites in Epstein's circle simply didn't care about the rumors. Either they didn't believe them, or they were willing to overlook them in exchange for the benefits of being close to him. After all, Epstein had access to the world's richest and most powerful, and he could offer introductions, opportunities, and the chance to rub shoulders with a rarefied class of people. But there's a darker theory, that many of these associates knew exactly what Epstein was up to, but chose to remain silent, either out of fear or complicity. Some speculate that Epstein's gatherings were not just social events, but opportunities to gather compromising material on the attendees. Hidden cameras, rumors suggest, were placed throughout his residences, recording the actions of those who believed they were in private. These recordings, it's believed, were Epstein's insurance policy, a tool to ensure that his powerful friends would protect him should the need arise. It's a chilling thought, but one that begins to explain the extraordinary lengths to which Epstein was able to evade justice for so long. When Epstein was finally arrested, many of his former associates scrambled to distance themselves from him. Clinton released statements disavowing any knowledge of Epstein's crimes. Prince Andrew was stripped of his royal duties, cast out of public life, though he remains untouched by the law. Other associates, from billionaire financiers to renowned academics, claimed ignorance of Epstein's true nature, asserting that they had no idea what he was doing behind closed doors. But is it possible that all these people, some of the sharpest minds and most influential figures in the world, were truly unaware? Or were they part of a culture of silence, one that allowed Epstein to continue his operations for years, shielded by the very power he cultivated? The Epstein network was vast, and its tendrils reached into nearly every corner of society. From the corridors of political power to the halls of academia, Epstein knew how to manipulate people, how to leverage relationships for his own gain. Whether through charm, blackmail, or sheer force of will, he built a web so strong that, even as the walls closed in around him, many of his most powerful friends remained untouched. As we peel back the layers of Epstein's life, one thing becomes clear. His connections were not incidental. They were the key to his power, and possibly to his darkest secrets. Chapter 3. Little St. James Island, the heart of darkness. Far from the prying eyes of the world, nestled among the sparkling turquoise waters of the Caribbean, lies Little St. James, a lush, secluded island that for most would seem like paradise. But for many who knew Jeffrey Epstein, the island has become synonymous with something far darker. Little St. James wasn't just a retreat for the billionaire. It was, by many accounts, the heart of his shadowy empire, a place where power and privilege mixed with unspeakable acts, shielded from the world by layers of secrecy, wealth, and influence. Little St. James was shrouded in mystery from the moment Epstein purchased it in 1998 for a reported $7.95 million. At first glance, the island seemed the quintessential tropical hideaway, with its sprawling mansion, pools, and lush greenery. But visitors and workers alike have described a far more unsettling atmosphere. High security and isolation marked the island as a fortress of privacy. Guards patrolled the perimeter, boats with tourists were kept at a distance, and employees were sworn to silence. Any breach of confidentiality could result in immediate dismissal or worse. The island's eerie reputation was magnified by its peculiar structures. Most infamous of all was the mysterious temple-like building on the island's northwest side. An imposing structure with bold blue and white stripes and a golden dome that once capped its roof. Theories about its purpose have ranged from the benign, a music room, perhaps to the sinister. The temple's strange design, combined with Epstein's penchant for secrecy, has led many to suspect it was used for far more nefarious purposes. Satellite images of the island even show that the temple's doors appeared to be reinforced, further fueling speculation that whatever took place inside was meant to remain hidden. But what truly made Little St. James notorious was not its architecture, it was the alleged crimes that occurred behind its walls. Numerous reports and testimonies from victims have painted a horrifying picture of what Epstein orchestrated on the island. Survivors like Virginia Giuffre have come forward, describing how they were trafficked and forced into sexual encounters with some of the world's most powerful men. Giuffre, who was brought to the island as a teenager, described it as a place of both opulence and terror. She claimed that young girls, often minors, were flown in and subjected to unspeakable abuse, their every move controlled by Epstein and his associates. Flight logs from Epstein's private planes only add to the intrigue. These logs, meticulously kept by pilots, reveal the names of high-profile guests who visited the island, often aboard Epstein's Lolita Express. The list includes names like Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, and billionaire Leslie Wexner. Some of these guests have denied wrongdoing, claiming their visits were purely social or philanthropic. However, the sheer number of trips, the high frequency of young female passengers, and the island's notorious reputation raise more questions than answers. Security on the island was also highly irregular. Despite the rumors that swirled around Epstein for years, Little St. James seemed to operate under a bubble of impunity. Authorities rarely, if ever, intervened. Employees on the island have recounted how security cameras were everywhere, watching both guests and staff. Some claim these cameras were part of a larger scheme, one designed not just for protection, but for entrapment. The theory goes that Epstein used these surveillance systems to secretly film his powerful guests, capturing compromising footage that could later be used for blackmail. Whether this theory holds water or not, it would explain how Epstein managed to maintain such a powerful network of connections while escaping any real consequences for so long. The island's isolation provided Epstein with the perfect cover. Located a short helicopter ride from the Virgin Islands, Little St. James was out of reach for most law enforcement, and Epstein's security apparatus ensured that few eyes could ever glimpse what went on there. Guests and employees alike were required to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements. Any slip-ups, any breach of confidentiality were met with swift retribution. In this carefully controlled environment, Epstein could do as he pleased, seemingly above the law. Even more disturbing was the absence of any serious oversight on the island. Despite whispers and accusations, authorities seemed reluctant to intervene. For years, Little St. James operated as Epstein's personal fiefdom, with no serious investigation into what happened on its shores. It wasn't until Epstein's 2008 conviction that the island began attracting significant attention, and even then, it was largely after the fact. How could such a place exist, hidden in plain sight, without drawing more scrutiny? Part of the answer lies in Epstein's remarkable ability to manipulate those around him. He surrounded himself with powerful figures from all walks of life, business, politics, science, and culture, and leveraged these connections to build an impenetrable wall of influence. Whether through blackmail, bribery, or sheer force of personality, Epstein seemed able to neutralize any threat to his empire. Even when authorities began to circle, as they did in the years leading up to his arrest, Epstein's network of friends and associates remained largely unscathed. But Epstein's island wasn't just a personal retreat. It was a symbol of the impunity that comes with extreme wealth and power. For decades, the elite who visited Little St. James seemed untouchable, operating in a world where the normal rules of law and morality simply didn't apply. The island represented the darkest side of privilege, a place where anything could be bought and anyone could be silenced. Today, Little St. James stands abandoned, a chilling monument to the secrets it once held. The buildings, once teeming with guests and activity, now lie empty. The temple, stripped of its golden dome, is weathered by the elements, its purpose never fully revealed. But even in its silence, the island continues to haunt the public consciousness, a place where the line between conspiracy and reality blurs. As more survivors step forward, sharing their stories of abuse and coercion, the true extent of what happened on Little St. James remains shrouded in mystery. Was it simply a private playground for the world's elite, or was it something far more sinister? A hub for blackmail, exploitation, and control? While Epstein himself may have taken many of these secrets to the grave, the dark shadow of Little St. James lingers, a reminder that the truth, no matter how well hidden, has a way of coming to light. Chapter 4. The Suicide of Jeffrey Epstein. On the morning of August 10th, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. His body, hanging by the neck from a bedsheet tied to the top bunk, appeared lifeless as guards finally entered his cell. But what should have been a straightforward case of suicide immediately spiraled into one of the most controversial and debated events in recent history. Epstein, a man at the heart of an international sex trafficking scandal, was dead, but the circumstances surrounding his death raised more questions than answers. And as those questions began to pile up, a dark cloud of suspicion settled over the case, spawning theories that still persist today. Just weeks before, Epstein had been arrested on federal charges of sex trafficking minors. After years of rumors and allegations, justice finally seemed within reach for his victims. Epstein's incarceration at MCC was meant to ensure that he remained under strict supervision, especially following a supposed suicide attempt just a month earlier on July 23rd. Found unconscious in his cell with marks on his neck, Epstein was placed on suicide watch. For the following days, he was monitored constantly to prevent any further attempts on his life. Yet, inexplicably, less than a week after being removed from suicide watch, Epstein was dead. The official cause of death? Suicide by hanging. But the details of that night, and the days leading up to his death, read like a script from a conspiracy thriller. First, there was the unusual lapse in security. Epstein was housed in one of the most secure sections of the MCC, where high-profile prisoners are kept under watch. Yet, on the night of his death, the two guards responsible for checking on him every 30 minutes failed to do so. Instead, they reportedly fell asleep for several hours, falsifying records to cover their tracks. During this time, Epstein's cellmate, who could have sounded the alarm, had been inexplicably transferred just a day earlier, leaving Epstein alone. Even more mysteriously, the cameras outside Epstein's cell, which should have captured any activity, malfunctioned. Crucial footage that could have provided insight into what really happened was missing, leading many to wonder whether this was a deliberate cover-up. The autopsy performed on Epstein's body only added fuel to the fire. The initial report classified his death as a suicide, but Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother, raised troubling doubts. Dr. Baden observed fractures in Epstein's hyoid bone and surrounding neck cartilage, injuries more commonly associated with strangulation rather than self-inflicted hanging. In all my years of experience, Baden stated, this kind of break is extremely unusual in a suicide, especially in a man of Epstein's age. His analysis sent shockwaves through the media, suggesting that Epstein's death might not have been a suicide at all. Was Epstein murdered to protect the powerful figures he was rumored to have compromised? As soon as his death was announced, conspiracy theories exploded. The list of people who might have wanted Epstein silenced was long and filled with names from the upper echelons of global power: politicians, celebrities, billionaires. Epstein's alleged blackmail operation, where he reportedly filmed high-profile individuals engaging in illegal activities with young girls, was said to include some of the world's most influential people. Wouldn't it make sense, then, that someone wanted him dead before he could reveal their secrets in court? One theory, popularized in both mainstream media and among conspiracy forums, was that Epstein's death was orchestrated by his powerful associates. Was it possible that a hitman was sent into MCC, that the guards were paid to look the other way, and that Epstein was quietly eliminated? The failure of the cameras and the guards' inaction certainly gave credence to this idea. It seemed implausible that so many protocols could have been ignored or violated by sheer incompetence. But there was another theory, one equally sensational, if not more so. Epstein didn't die that night at all. According to this line of thinking, Epstein, with the help of powerful allies, staged his death and was smuggled out of MCC to live under a new identity. After all, with his vast wealth and connections, Epstein would have had the means to vanish without a trace. In this version of events, the body found in Epstein's cell was either a look-alike or had been tampered with to cover up his escape. Proponents of this theory pointed to the bungled autopsy, the guard's suspicious behavior, and the camera malfunctions as evidence of a high-level cover-up designed to let Epstein slip through the cracks. While these theories may seem far-fetched, they highlight the sheer disbelief that surrounded Epstein's death. How could such a high-profile prisoner, arguably the most notorious inmate in the United States at the time, die under such bizarre circumstances without someone pulling the strings? Many believed that the powerful network Epstein had cultivated over the years, a web of influence stretching across continents, was responsible for his untimely demise. Forensic experts, criminologists, and ex-prison officials weighed in, but their conclusions varied. Some agreed with Dr. Baden, finding the injuries inconsistent with a typical hanging. Others, like former MCC employees, pointed to the prison's chronic understaffing and incompetence, suggesting that Epstein's death, while suspicious, was more likely the result of negligence than conspiracy. But even these voices couldn't drown out the growing clamor of public suspicion. In the end, the death of Jeffrey Epstein left more questions than answers. His victims were robbed of the chance to see him stand trial, and the full extent of his crimes, along with the identities of those involved, remains shrouded in mystery. Whether Epstein's death was the result of a botched suicide watch or a carefully planned hit, the world may never know. What is clear, however, is that Epstein's life and death exposed a dark undercurrent of power and privilege, a world where the rich and influential operate with impunity, their secrets buried along with the bodies of those who know too much. As the dust settled on the Epstein case, one thing became undeniable. This was no ordinary suicide. Chapter 5: The Silence of the Media. In the world of investigative journalism, certain stories should be too big to ignore, too explosive to contain. Yet, somehow, Jeffrey Epstein's monstrous crimes simmered beneath the surface for years, barely touched by the mainstream media. Despite his connections to some of the most influential people on the planet, despite the whispers of sexual abuse and trafficking, Epstein operated in a shadowy world where scrutiny seemed to vanish, cloaked in secrecy and silence. How could this happen? Why did the media, the so-called watchdog of democracy, fail to shine a light on one of the darkest stories of our time? The answer to those questions is layered in a complex web of power, influence, and alleged complicity. As Epstein's empire of exploitation flourished, the few journalists brave enough to pursue the story found themselves up against forces that seemed intent on keeping his crimes buried. News organizations, pressured by powerful allies of Epstein, sometimes killed stories before they could ever see the light of day. In the early 2000s, whispers of Epstein's illicit activities had already reached the ears of certain investigative reporters. Journalists began looking into Epstein's ties to wealthy financiers, politicians, and celebrities. There were rumors of underage girls being trafficked to Epstein's private island, Little St. James, and to his homes in New York and Palm Beach. Yet, as one investigative journalist after another began to dig, they hit brick walls. Editors and publishers, often citing legal concerns, shut down their investigations. The question that hung in the air was chilling. Who was Epstein protecting? Or, more accurately, who was protecting him? One of the most glaring examples of this media blackout came to light in 2019 when a leaked video revealed that ABC News had shelved an investigative report on Epstein 3 years earlier. In the now infamous footage, ABC News anchor Amy Robach can be seen on camera, visibly frustrated, lamenting how her story about Epstein was killed. "I had this interview with Virginia Roberts," Robach said, referring to one of Epstein's most prominent accusers. "We had everything. We had our allegations against Prince Andrew. It was unbelievable what we had. Clinton everything. Roback's words painted a picture of a story that should have rocked the world. But instead, the report was never aired. Roback explained how ABC News feared repercussions, particularly from the British royal family, given Prince Andrew's alleged involvement with Epstein. It was unbelievable, she said. We were so afraid we wouldn't be able to interview Kate and Will. That also quashed the story. The revelation was jaw-dropping. Here was a major news organization admitting that a bombshell investigation into Epstein was effectively silenced to avoid upsetting powerful connections. The Roback video wasn't an isolated incident. Behind the scenes, media organizations faced immense pressure not to publish or broadcast stories that delved too deeply into Epstein's affairs. In some cases, it was fear of litigation. Epstein, with his vast wealth and high-powered legal team, was notorious for using defamation lawsuits as a weapon against journalists. The mere threat of being dragged into a protracted legal battle was enough to make editors think twice before running stories about him. But there were darker suspicions, too. Some theorists suggest that certain media executives may have had personal connections to Epstein or his network, leading to deliberate censorship. Epstein, after all, wasn't just a billionaire financier. He was a man who thrived on information, compromising information, the kind that could ruin careers and destroy reputations. If Epstein was indeed collecting blackmail material on the world's elite, as many believe, it stands to reason that some of his leverage extended into the highest levels of media. Could it be that certain media executives were part of the very network Epstein cultivated, bound by mutual interests or buried secrets? This theory isn't entirely far-fetched. After Epstein's arrest in 2019, it became evident just how deep his connections ran. Many of his closest associates were not just politicians and business moguls, but also key players in the media and entertainment industries. These relationships might have given Epstein an additional layer of protection. How many stories were shelved or watered down because someone with influence made a quiet phone call? The delayed response to Epstein's crimes also highlights another insidious reality: media self-censorship. Even when no explicit pressure was applied, the nature of the news business meant that certain stories were deemed too risky to pursue. Epstein's connections to figures like Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, and Prince Andrew made him untouchable to some extent. In a world where access to political and social elites is a prized commodity for media outlets, alienating those elites by running a damaging story on Epstein could have serious repercussions. It wasn't until Epstein's 2019 arrest that the floodgates opened. At that point, the sheer volume of evidence and the public outcry made it impossible for the media to remain silent any longer. Suddenly, newspapers, television networks, and digital outlets were tripping over themselves to cover the story. But the question remained: why hadn't they acted sooner? Why had Epstein, whose crimes spanned decades, managed to evade meaningful scrutiny for so long? Some argue that the media's silence was a reflection of broader societal complicity. Epstein was a man who represented the worst of unchecked power and privilege. His connections to the elite insulated him from accountability, and the media, intentionally or not, played a role in maintaining that insulation. In protecting Epstein, the media protected the system that allowed men like him to thrive, a system where wealth, influence, and status trump justice. The Epstein case serves as a sobering reminder of how easily the truth can be suppressed in a world where power and influence intersect with the media. It is a chilling example of how stories that should shake the foundations of society can be buried, delayed, or diluted when the stakes are high enough. In the end, the media's failure to expose Epstein sooner wasn't just about legal threats or editorial caution. It was about a much larger problem: how easily the powerful can manipulate the truth, and how often the truth becomes a casualty in the game of influence. Even now, with Epstein dead, his crimes exposed, and his network under scrutiny, the question lingers: how much more did we not know? How much more was hidden in plain sight, buried beneath layers of influence and silence, protected by the very institutions meant to inform the public? The silence of the media, once deafening, now echoes as a testament to how far-reaching and insidious Epstein's power truly was. Chapter 6. The Theories That Won't Die. Even in death, Jeffrey Epstein's shadow looms large over the world of conspiracy theories, his life a swirling vortex of mystery and unanswered questions. The sheer scale of Epstein's influence, his connections to some of the most powerful people on the planet, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding his death have sparked a wildfire of speculation. Some theories seem plausible, grounded in the murky waters of power and corruption, while others stray into the realm of the bizarre and unsettling. One thing remains certain: the Epstein story has become a breeding ground for theories that refuse to die. One of the most persistent theories revolves around the idea that Epstein was not just a billionaire with a penchant for illegal activities, but an asset in a far-reaching international intelligence operation. According to this theory, Epstein's wealth and access to the world's elite were not coincidental. Rather, he was carefully positioned as a honey trap operative tasked with collecting blackmail material on powerful figures for intelligence agencies. The supposed aim? To control and manipulate global politics and economics. The idea of using sexual blackmail as a tool of espionage is not new. During the Cold War, both the KGB and CIA were known to employ such tactics. Epstein, according to proponents of this theory, may have been part of a modern version of this strategy, gathering compromising information on politicians, businessmen, and celebrities through his network of young women. The infamous hidden cameras reportedly found in his properties, including his Manhattan mansion and Little St. James Island, fuel speculation that Epstein was recording these interactions for leverage. There are whispers that Epstein's connections to figures like Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, and others were not simply friendships or business deals, but part of a broader operation designed to entrap and blackmail these individuals. Epstein's ties to intelligence services, particularly Israeli Mossad or the CIA, are often cited as the unseen force behind his rise. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate, is rumored to have family ties to intelligence work, further adding fuel to this theory. But how much of this can be substantiated? Critics point out that while Epstein's connections and the presence of surveillance equipment are suspicious, there is no direct evidence tying him to any intelligence agency. Still, the blackmail angle remains a compelling explanation for how Epstein managed to stay protected for so long, even as accusations against him mounted. Another theory that refuses to die links Epstein's network to something even more sinister: organized crime and cult-like activities. Some believe that Epstein's empire was not just a haven for the rich and powerful to indulge in illegal activities, but a hub for something darker, something that stretched across continents and into secret societies. The strange symbolism found on Epstein's private island, most notably the blue and white striped temple-like structure, has been cited as evidence of occult practices or ritualistic activities. While many dismiss the temple as simply an odd architectural choice, conspiracy theorists see it as a sign of something more malevolent. Theories range from Epstein's involvement in satanic rituals to claims that his network was tied to global elite trafficking rings, where children and young women were exploited not only for sexual purposes, but for bizarre, cult-like ceremonies. These claims have largely been fueled by online forums and speculative YouTube videos, with little hard evidence to support them. Yet, they persist, propelled by the unsettling imagery associated with Epstein's properties and the sheer scope of his criminal network. More grounded, though no less alarming, is the theory that Epstein's empire was part of a larger, global trafficking ring involving the elite. This theory suggests that Epstein's wealth and influence allowed him to operate as a key player in a vast, clandestine operation involving the trafficking of underage girls, with powerful figures from politics, business, and entertainment either complicit or turning a blind eye. Epstein, according to this theory, was not acting alone. He was simply one cog in a much larger machine. The idea of a global elite trafficking ring has been bolstered by the fact that many of Epstein's associates have been accused of similar crimes, or at the very least, of enabling his actions. The reluctance of law enforcement to thoroughly investigate these connections, coupled with the leniency Epstein received in his initial conviction in 2008, suggests that there may be a concerted effort to protect those involved. Flight logs from Epstein's private jet, dubbed the Lolita Express, list numerous high-profile passengers, leading to speculation that these individuals were complicit in or at least aware of Epstein's activities. Technology companies and billionaire financiers also come under scrutiny in the vast web of Epstein-related conspiracy theories. Epstein had deep ties to the tech world, reportedly investing in several major companies and associating with influential figures from Silicon Valley. Some suggest that these tech elites, many of whom are shrouded in their own controversies, may have used their resources to help cover up Epstein's crimes. Epstein's interest in cutting-edge scientific research, particularly his bizarre interest in eugenics and plans to seed the human race by impregnating multiple women, adds another layer of intrigue to this theory. Could it be that Epstein's ties to technology and science were part of a larger plan? Some believe that he was involved in secret experiments funded by the world's richest men, and that his death was orchestrated to prevent these disturbing projects from coming to light. The involvement of billionaire financiers, too, raises questions about how Epstein was able to maintain his lifestyle even after his criminal record became public knowledge. Who was funding him, and why? As with all conspiracy theories, the challenge lies in separating fact from fiction. Epstein's life and death are riddled with unanswered questions, and it is precisely these gaps in knowledge that allow such theories to thrive. The official narrative that Epstein was a wealthy sex trafficker who abused his connections to avoid justice explains much, but not all. The abrupt end to his life in a jail cell, the mysterious circumstances surrounding his death, and the incomplete investigations into his powerful network leave too many loose ends. Ultimately, these theories, whether plausible or far-fetched, point to one undeniable truth. Epstein was a man with access to extraordinary power. And in a world where power can buy silence, conspiracy theories are not just inevitable. They are perhaps the only way for the public to attempt to make sense of what really happened. Whether Epstein was an intelligence asset, the head of a global trafficking ring, or simply a man who manipulated the elite for his own gain, his story will continue to captivate and disturb for years to come. Chapter 7: Unanswered Questions and Lasting Legacy. The death of Jeffrey Epstein closed one chapter of a story that left far more questions than answers, plunging the world into a spiral of suspicion and intrigue. The mysteries surrounding his life, wealth, and alleged crimes continue to haunt the public conscience, casting shadows over the powerful elite he consorted with and the systems that allowed him to operate unchecked for decades. Despite his demise, the Epstein saga lives on in whispers, dark rumors, and conspiracy theories, an unresolved riddle that seems to gnaw at the very fabric of public trust. The core mystery of Epstein's rise remains. How did a man with no verifiable financial acumen or credentials climb so rapidly into the upper echelons of the global elite? Epstein's career defies logic. After brief stints as a math teacher and Wall Street trader, he emerged seemingly out of nowhere, living a life of unimaginable luxury, owning private jets and mansions across the globe. He courted the world's most powerful men, from former U.S. presidents to British royalty. His wealth, which has been estimated in the hundreds of millions, remains largely untraceable, a fact that raises even more questions about how he amassed such fortune. Was Epstein simply a financial genius who leveraged his charm to climb the social ladder? Or was he a puppet in a much larger, more sinister operation? The opaque nature of his wealth has led to persistent speculation that Epstein was involved in blackmail or intelligence work, possibly for governments or criminal enterprises. His relationships with powerful figures like Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew add layers to these suspicions. Epstein's frequent gatherings with world leaders, academics, and billionaires at his Manhattan mansion or his secluded island in the Caribbean seem to suggest that his influence reached far beyond what could be expected of a mere financier. But even now, no one knows how deep his connections truly ran or what those relationships entailed. The failure of the justice system to fully investigate these ties has only fueled the idea that Epstein's influence was greater than anyone knew, and that he was shielded by forces that remain in the shadows. Perhaps the most glaring mystery of all is the role of his enablers. How could someone with such a sordid double life continue operating for so long, evading real punishment despite numerous warnings and complaints. When he was arrested in 2008, Epstein struck a plea deal that allowed him to escape serious prison time, even as scores of victims came forward with horrifying allegations of abuse. His cushy prison arrangement in Florida, where he was allowed to leave the facility for hours each day, suggests a degree of privilege and protection that goes far beyond what the average person could expect. Who protected him, and why? The reluctance of authorities to fully investigate Epstein's network of high-level associates is equally damning. Many of those connected to Epstein have walked away unscathed, denying any knowledge of his criminal activities, claiming they were deceived by his charm and wealth. This includes not just politicians and royalty, but business moguls, scientists, and celebrities. It is hard to believe that no one knew, or worse, that those who did know were willing to look the other way. The idea that there exists an untouchable class of individuals, so powerful that they can escape justice, is one that chills to the bone. This reluctance to prosecute the powerful raises disturbing questions about the nature of wealth and influence in modern society. Epstein's case has become a symbol of the corruption embedded in the highest levels of power. It seems that for those with enough money and the right connections, the rules of society simply do not apply. This reality has been laid bare in the aftermath of his death. While a handful of Epstein's co-conspirators, such as Ghislaine Maxwell, have faced legal consequences, most of his powerful friends remain unscathed. The psychological impact of Epstein's story on public trust cannot be overstated. In an era where faith in institutions was already faltering, the Epstein case has deepened a sense of cynicism and distrust. If a man like Epstein, allegedly responsible for some of the most heinous crimes imaginable, could evade justice for so long, what does that say about the world we live in? The Epstein case has become a potent symbol of the ways in which wealth and privilege can shield people from accountability, a narrative that resonates deeply with a public increasingly aware of systemic inequalities. Epstein's death only amplified these suspicions. The official cause of death, a suicide in his Manhattan jail cell, was met with widespread skepticism. The failure of the prison surveillance systems on the night of his death, the unsupervised guards, and the strange injuries noted in his autopsy that were more consistent with strangulation than hanging all point to the possibility of foul play. Was Epstein's silence before he could reveal incriminating details about the elite? Or was his death part of an elaborate escape plan orchestrated by unseen hands? In many ways, Epstein's story is a reflection of the larger crises of our time. It touches on issues of wealth inequality, the abuse of power, and the fragility of public trust in institutions. The unanswered questions surrounding his life and death leave a lingering sense of injustice, as though the full truth remains just out of reach, hidden behind a veil of silence and complicity. The legacy of the Epstein case, then, is not just one of individual crime and corruption, but of a broader societal failure. It has shown us how the rich and powerful can operate above the law, using their influence to shield themselves from scrutiny. It has revealed the dark underbelly of high society, where money and privilege can buy silence, even in the face of horrific crimes. As the Epstein case fades from the headlines, it is crucial that we do not let these questions go unanswered. We must demand transparency and accountability, not just for the sake of Epstein's victims, but to ensure that no one else can operate with the same impunity. The lessons of Epstein's rise and fall should serve as a warning. Without vigilance, we risk allowing the same abuses to occur again, hidden in the shadows, protected by wealth and power. The truth may remain elusive, but the fight for justice must continue, because without it, the cycle of corruption will only repeat itself.